Okay, good morning guys. In this video we're going to be looking at using Pythagoras' theorem, but today we're going to be trying to find a shorter length in a right angle triangle. So, recap of last lesson, Pythagoras' theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So the first thing I'm going to do, I need to label my length c. Remember, always start with c and try and remember what that length c is. C is always the longest length opposite the right angle. My longest length is this length labelled 9 because it's longest and opposite the right angle. Okay, so this is my C length, and then A and B, it really doesn't matter, you will get the same answer either way. Let's call this one A and this one B. Okay, so now we're going to substitute in what we know. A squared, do we know what A is? Yes, A is 4, so instead of A squared I'm going to call it 4 squared. So B squared, well B is labelled X. So instead of b squared, let's call it x squared, and then c squared. So in this lesson, we do know c, and c is that length 9. So instead of c squared, we're going to call it 9 squared. So all I've done, I've written out my equation, and then I've just substituted in everything I know. So I'm just swapping those a, b, and c with that information that we can see on the diagram. All right. So at this point, let's just do all the maths that we can, and there's some easy bits that we can do before it gets more complicated. First of all, we know that 4 squared is 16, and we know that 9 squared is 81. So let's just write down that, because we know that, right? Okay, now it's looking a little bit different from last lesson, because I want to know what this x is. I want to find this missing length. However, I've got this kind of 16 in the way. So I'm not interested in 16 plus x squared. All I want is x on its own. So I have an equation to solve now. So we need to think back to year 7 really. So think about solving equations. How can I get from this to just x on its own? Well, the first thing I can think of is that I don't want this 16 here. So let's subtract 16 from my left hand side, and to keep it balanced I'm going to subtract 16 from my right hand side as well. Alright, so that 16 has vanished, and then I've done 81, take away 16 to get 65. So I've taken away 16 from both sides. Okay, I've nearly solved the problem. So I have something squared makes 65, right? 65 is not a square number, so this is not going to be a whole number answer actually. So when I square root both sides, I can say that x is the square root of 65. I've used a calculator for this, so if you type in the square root button on your calculator, so the square root of 65, that should give you 8.06 when you round it to 2 decimal places. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now, can you please pause the video and see if you can use a similar method to work out this missing length on this right angle triangle, please, and then unpause it when you're ready for the solution. Okay, so for this question, again, we're using Pythagoras' theorem, so a squared plus b squared equals c squared. The first thing we do, we label the triangle. I always start with c, which is my longest length opposite the right angle. So this 10 is c. A and b, it really doesn't matter which length we choose. Let's just call this one a and then this one b. Alright, so let's substitute in what we know. So instead of a squared, we're going to call it 8 squared because we called a 8. Instead of b squared, we're going to call it x squared because we said that x is b. Alright, and then instead of c squared, we're calling it 10 squared. Okay, at this point, there's some easy maths to do before we get onto the solving equation part. We know that 8 squared is 64, and we know that 10 squared is 100. So 64 equals x squared plus 100. Okay, at this point, it's looking a bit complicated because all I need is x on its own, but I've got this 64 in the way. I don't want that 64 to be there. So what I need to do, I'm going to solve this equation by subtracting 64 from both sides. Right? So please excuse my handwriting. It looks like a small nursery child has drawn this, but there we go. Okay, so I've taken away 64 from both sides, and that tells me that x squared is 36, because 100 take away 64 is 36. So now I know something squared makes 36. What number squared makes 36? If I square root both sides, that tells me that x equals 6, because 6 squared is 36. So what this means is that this missing side is 6. We've worked out that that missing length is 6. Okay, so for our classwork today, I would like you to try these two groups of questions, please. So in your first group of questions, it's exactly the same as what we just done for our two worked examples. So you're finding out those shorter lengths. Okay, and then in your second group of questions, you're jumping from the skills that we learned in our first video lesson together and in today's lesson. So sometimes you're looking for that longer length C, so sometimes you're looking for that hypotenuse length, and sometimes you're looking for the shorter length. So you need to decide which of those methods to use. Right, so just like last lesson, please just let me know if you need any help with this. Just send me a message on Google Classroom or send me an email, and in a few seconds I will give you the answers. So pause the video here, or you can work from the worksheet that I've attached on Google Classroom. It's these questions, but just in downloadable form. Right. And these are your solutions to the classwork for today. Thank you very much.